Hello, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekend. Oh, my goodness, this is Michael on the graveyard shift in the wee hours of the night with your daily trivia question. Once again, to get your brand new day started and to get your weekend kicked off as well, and a gorgeous weekend at that. My goodness, I think the so-called cold front that came through, we're going to enjoy some like mid 80-degree weather, and the nights are supposed to go down to 60s. That's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of summer I like, folks. Got like one more week to go before classes start. So enjoy it and have some fun. Have some fun. So the answer to the previous trivia question was, of course, the 1955 minimum wage increase. Now, the minimum wage goes back as far as the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. It goes back to the late 1930s, signed into law by, of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This created the right to minimum wage, and the concept of time and a half was also established when you go over 40 hours. It also dealt with child labor laws and so forth, but it goes back to 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA. In 1955, President Eisenhower urged Congress to amend the FLSA, one of the many times that it would be amended, in order to increase the number of employees who were covered by minimum wage laws and to increase the minimum wage itself. Usually when it's amended, what's tacked on to the very end of it is an increase in the minimum wage. Now, at the time, retail workers and service workers were not covered by minimum wage laws. Congress would, in fact, go on to pass the amendment, and President Eisenhower signed it into law on August 12, 1955, which, of course, say it with me, was the focus of the trivia question. The amendment increased the minimum wage from 75 cents to a whole whopping $1. Now, despite a push by some members of Congress, retail workers, service workers, agricultural workers, and construction workers, all of these groups were still not required to be paid at least the minimum wage. So, you're seeing at this point in time in the mid-50s an increase in the minimum wage, amendments to the FLSA, and still some debates, many of many of which would come in the future as to who's covered and everything else, many other variables that comes with the minimum wage. Over the years that followed, through the 60s and into the 70s, the FLSA was amended many times over in attempts to compensate for a number of things: expanded coverage of those who were eligible, equality in pay, age discrimination, migrant and seasonal workers, tipped employees like waitresses and so forth, employees with disabilities. Those are just some of the iceberg stuff that we have grown up learning about, listening to, seeing on the news. There are so many other variables that come into play when the FLSA is amended. Okay, the minimum wage went up during these amendments, during these periods, in what are known as stages. Now, it went up to $1.60, $2.30, $3.35, $4.25, respectively. The $4.25. That's when I kind of entered into the workforce and started paying a little bit more attention to the minimum wage. I'm old enough to remember when I was making $4.25, right? Okay, go look that up. There's a trivia question for you. So the current federal minimum wage, is $7.25 per hour. Now, do the math yourself. That's an increase of $6.25 since 1955. Okay, this has been the case since 2009. Now, you don't have to be an economist by any means whatsoever to figure out that this is not kept up with the quote-unquote day and age. I mean, it's easy to figure out. It's behind the times, right? So the great debates that have surfaced and that have been played out over the years include stuff like balancing the budget versus the effect of hiking the minimum wage, having what you may have heard in the news a lot as a living wage versus reduced jobs. And that, of course, includes raising the cost of workers versus doing more with less, offsetting higher pays with absorbing the costs, right? Which most companies in today's day and age are willing to do. There's political, state, social issues. Debates go on and on with the minimum wage amendments to the FLSA, and whether we should increase the minimum wage or not. The current kind of battle cry right now that's out there is raising the minimum wage to at the least to $15 an hour, which you might have heard with some service workers, food retail. They're all kind of getting behind the $15 minimum, right? So here's a fact, some facts. The value minimum wage and raising the minimum wage and that those increases, those incremental increases, are often looked at as what the value of minimum wage is. Now, the value of minimum wage has obviously deteriorated over the years. It has not had a what's known as like a real value, an inflation adjusted value, since 1968. That was when, for let's say, the focus of the trivia question was from 55. So from 55 to 68, it kept up with productivity. It kept the pace with inflation. The value increased. Now at in 1968, at that point, it began to decline significantly, and has not stopped declining since. And it's probably not going to stop declining either. In 2021's $7.25 federal minimum wage value was a little over $4. So there you go. There's a graph there that kind of explains all that. Here's some geek factoids. If the minimum wage had in fact kept up with productivity and adjusted for inflation correctly, today it would be well over $20 an hour. So keep that, put that in perspective. A lot of companies are adjusting this for themselves, and some are not. And that's the kind of argument, that's the kind of area of the argument, if you will, that I fall into. I am actually against raising the minimum wage because I think that a lot of companies out there are filling that void themselves. They're willing to pay their workers. Not all of them are. Not all of them are by any means. Some states on a state level don't have a minimum wage requirement. I think Mississippi is one of those states. But some state, like the company I work for now, for instance, one of the companies I work for, are willing to pay workers over $15 an hour. And basically what they're doing is they're getting ready for when the minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour. They can tell their workers, hey, we're already ahead of the game. And in this regard, you see a lot of what's called an across the board kind of so-called raises, like a dollar adjustment across, and they give everybody a dollar raise. So that's kind of where I'm at on that argument. Now, some studies have actually found, here's another geek factoid, some studies have found that hiking the minimum wage actually increases employment, right? So that's one argument to consider as well. And that's kind of like where we are at the minimum wage right now. All right, folks, enough talk about the minimum wage and pay and all that good stuff. Let's get to some good stuff. A weekend trivia question for August 13th, rather. Here we go. On this day in 1982, this classic coming-of-age movie opens in theaters, which follows a crazy and gnarly year in the life of a group of high school students in San Fernando, California, with a very revealing pool scene that had this music to go with it. Oh my gosh. Have a good weekend, folks. Go have some fun. I'll meet you by the pool. Ugh.